So today is International Women's Day, and to celebrate at Facebook, we're sharing inspiration and knowledge all around the world. This is one of a series of many Facebook Live broadcasts that's happened across the world today, where we've heard from incredible public figures, NGOs, business leaders, small business owners and entrepreneurs all across this extraordinary one-day event. And I have the privilege of being here with Lauren Leader-Chivee, an author, activist, and advisor on diversity and women's issues. Lauren is the founder and CEO of All In Together. Welcome, Lauren.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
Great. Well, I'd like to start, just if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to everybody who's watching. Tell us a little bit about what you do and the focus around women's issues.
Sure. So I'm Lauren Leader-Chivee, and I have spent the better part of my career focused on advancing women and underrepresented minorities in the workplace and now in politics. I ran a major think tank that worked on women's issues and researched those issues around the world. And then now I'm the founder and CEO of the All In Together campaign, which I know we're going to talk more about, which is one of the only nonpartisan women's political leadership organizations in the country, focused on educating women around the tools of civic and political power. And, you know, it's all sort of part of the same portfolio, which is that I really deeply believe that for our nation to thrive and prosper economically and socially, that we have to ensure that all of our citizens are fully participating in every dimension of American society, and that is business and entrepreneurship and politics and really all the spheres of power. And so, you know, I work across a lot of those, and I think they're related and interconnected.
So this is a really important day for what you stand for. I just want to take a moment to ask everybody who's tuning in to make sure to ask your questions for Lauren. We'll take some time to take questions from people, so just comment on the side in the post. So as you shared, the role of civic engagement has never been more important globally. Tell us more around why it matters so much right now in this moment.
Well, I mean, I think it's always been important. I think that what's changed is that there is clearly a much greater appreciation, particularly in the United States, among liberal women, I think especially, for the importance of political activism, because I think a lot of women, liberal women, and I want to be specific about that, I think a lot of liberal women feel that there were outcomes in this last election that they are unhappy with and that they don't agree with. And I think, you know, we've been talking for years about the under-participation of women, American women, in our political process. You know, women do outvote men. They are more likely to be registered to vote and to show up at the polls than men. And in fact, women have turned every election in the United States since 1980, which is something very few women know, actually. Yeah. But when it comes to other levels of political engagement, you know, holding those people that we've elected accountable for what we've sent them to office to do, we are largely under participating. And so, you know, in any political cycle, the opposition is often more mobilized, and we certainly saw that with the Tea Party during the Obama years. But I think we are seeing a really new and refreshed political engagement of women that is certainly unique in my lifetime. I think that my mother's generation, you know, we certainly saw this in the 1960s and 70s, the women who mobilized en masse to actually enable all the things that we enjoy, you know, the access to higher education, the access to unlimited career possibilities, and of course the access to representation in government. But I think for our generation, and I'm 41, but I think for my generation and younger, this is clearly a galvanizing moment, and so things feel different. But it's not just because you may be angry about a particular political outcome that we should be participating. We should be participating because we're American citizens, and the essence of democracy is that we own it, and we're the majority of the American population.
What are the economic implications for women in giving them a stronger voice?
Well, I mean, they're huge. I mean, they're almost incalculable. And I point to a couple statistics, and you I think kindly reference my book, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But you know, I think there's not enough appreciation in the country for the economic benefit of diversity writ large. But women are clearly a huge piece of that. If we were to just close the labor force participation gap, and this is not even speaking to the wage gap, which is a whole other dimension, but just the labor force participation gap, the number of women in the workforce compared to the number of men in the workforce, were we to close that gap, which is unfortunately has started to widen in recent years, we would add $5 trillion to the American economy. And for context, that's 3% GDP. On a global scale, that number is somewhere between 15 and 20 trillion dollars. So these are massive numbers, and it has trended up. Women are now 38% of the primary breadwinners in the United States, which is a huge change. That's been a straight line up since the 1960s. But there's no question that the economic participation of women is absolutely transformational for the American economy, but we could be doing better, and we should be.
And what are you seeing from around the world in terms of these trends? Are you seeing similar things?
I do think that there is a growing, it's so hard to generalize, right? Because there's such different context. If you're talking about Europe or Asia or Africa, I think Americans particularly forget that actually many places in the world are far ahead of us in terms of the gender equity of women, and in surprising ways. There are places like Tunisia and Rwanda and South Africa that are actually far ahead of us in terms of their political participation. The United States is 74th in the world for the political participation of women. And then there are other places like India and China that have many more women CEOs than to the United States. There's 11% women CEOs in India, 14% in China. We're at 4% in the United States. So, we're used to thinking of the U.S. as being sort of the example for the world, and I think increasingly we're starting to realize that there are actually plenty, and we haven't even talked about like the Nordic countries or what's happening in Europe in terms of women's equality, which in many ways many of those countries are far ahead, and the number of countries that have had women heads of state, et cetera. So there's lots of measures of that, but I do think things have changed, and the opening up of understanding around women's equality thanks to social media and the connection of the World Wide Web has really changed that discourse around the world. There's tons of work to do. But, whether it's, women driving and actually more importantly, starting businesses and running businesses in Saudi Arabia to, moving out of poverty in India and Bangladesh and other places around the world, all over the world, I think we are at this really extraordinary transformational point.
It's terrific to hear, and thank you for championing this cause for us. I want to talk a little bit about your book. The book is called Crossing the Thinnest Line, and in it you argue that diversity is the most underleveraged economic asset in the United States. And I know you just started sharing some of that, but can you talk more a little bit about that?
Well, and there's so much more. I think, look, the truth is about the United States is that in many ways we are one of the most inclusive nations on earth, and there are many wonderful signs to point to of the ways in which, immigrants and women and people of color and underrepresented groups have contributed so massively to our economy. But there's so much more benefit that we could be gaining, and you can really look across a vast array of topics. Obviously, immigration, which is such a hot topic right now, there's overwhelming evidence that immigrants contribute far more to the American economy than they take, and that is also true of the undocumented, and we forget that. Undocumented immigrants in this country contribute massively to the American tax base. Undocumented immigrants are still paying taxes to the tune of tens of billions of dollars a year, not to say nothing of what they contribute in terms of just the work that they contribute to the economy that Americans don't want, that natural-born citizens often don't want to do. But then you also look at the contribution, obviously, of underrepresented minorities, which is massive and growing. We will be a minority-majority nation in our lifetime, which is something that is actually occurring in a number of states already. And yet on the flip side, we're also disproportionately incarcerating underrepresented minorities, which is a massive drain on our economy. And we are essentially draining the future talent pool because we are so massively and disproportionately locking up, brown America. And then, of course, in terms of women, which we've talked about, I think we're starting to hit the limits of women's participation in our workforce because we have never invested in the kinds of supports and structures that other countries have to enable women who do continue to carry disproportionate burdens of care, whether that's elder care or child care. We've never really built into the American economy the kinds of structures that requires for women to stay in the workforce. And if you are making, if you're a $40,000 to $60,000 a year wage earner, which is the vast majority of Americans, you can't afford the kinds of child care costs or elder care, and elder care is a whole other burden. So, we have not even begun to deal with the massive economic potential of the diversity of this nation. And I deeply believe that if we take that on more seriously, we have just tremendous gains that could come from it. I'm not super optimistic that's going to happen in this particular administration, unfortunately, which is a shame. But it's an undeniable, massive opportunity for the country.
Our research shows that women face many obstacles when it comes to starting their own business. And when they get going and when they find the courage to move forward, they're just as confident, if not more confident, than men.
Yeah.
What would you say to that? What advice would you
Well,
give
it's
to somebody?
amazing how consistent that theme is across so many different areas. You know, just to go back to politics for 1 second, and then I want to talk about entrepreneurship. You know, women are actually just as likely to be elected when they run as are men. Statistically, they do just as well. They get elected at the same rate. But the issue is women being willing to step forward and do that, and having the confidence to do that. In entrepreneurship, it's a little different. It is much harder for women to get started because, as we know, still only about less than 5% of all venture capital funding is going to women, and women struggle to get the kinds of loans and, you know, access to capital that men do, and that's consistent. But there's lots of, I think, efforts to address that, and I'm seeing more and more organizations stepping forward to fill the void. But women still, you know, struggle to get the support that they need once they are running those businesses, and they often don't. Particularly minority women, poorer women who start businesses, don't necessarily have the networks of sort of powerful folks to help ensure that their businesses can be successful, and they often kind of, you know, hit a wall at a certain point where they could scale if they had better resources or better access to capital, and they don't. And again, another amazing opportunity for the country. Small businesses are a huge lifeblood of the American economy, and those are heavily driven by their, I think, 22 million women entrepreneurs in the United States. It's an incredible number.
And I met this morning with a couple of female entrepreneurs some just getting started, some further in, and it's just so enlightening and inspiring to hear how they're going through their journeys and how they're making it work, and, you know, creating amazing success stories and products and ideas that we couldn't imagine.
It's so important. I mean, the whole marketplace is still littered with like big gaping holes where women have not been present, and there is massive market opportunity that's missed as a result. And so, you know, I'm really optimistic about the contributions that women entrepreneurs are going to continue to make.
That's fantastic to hear. So I want to go back to the title of your book. The rest of the title is Crossing the Thinnest Line, How Embracing Diversity from the Office to the Oscars Makes Us Stronger. I'm keen to hear a little bit more about the Office to the Oscars piece, given we just came out of the Academy Awards. I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, I mean, look, I think, you know, fundamentally, so I grew up watching Wonder Woman. You know, in the 1970s, when I was coming of age, there were actually a huge range of really powerful women characters on television, you know, from Wonder Woman to, you know, the Bionic Woman to a whole bunch of others that were really amazing sort of feminist role models in my childhood. Unfortunately, we haven't made much progress since that time, and there is still a real lack of visible representation of women and people of color on television and in film. And it matters because our images shape so much of our attitudes. You know, many people feel that in some ways the Cosby Show, for instance, helped open up the understanding of white America around to you know, affluent Black America, which many white Americans had never seen before. And, you know, whether it's Ellen and Will and Grace sort of changing American attitudes around gays and lesbians, to, you know, seeing powerful women in key roles, it matters a lot. And unless you think, because I think, you know, we did have a sort of landmark Academy Awards this year because of Moonlight and you know, Viola Davis and this sort of historic number of wins for people of color. Do not be fooled. I mean, the numbers have not improved. Every study that looks at sort of on par, you know, the numbers of women and people of color in front of and behind the camera remain pathetically low. I mean, like less than 10%. And 95+% of the executives in Hollywood who make the decisions around film and television are white males. And so there is a big blind spot there, even though, by the way, film and television that has strong representation of women and people of color actually does financially better. There's overwhelming evidence that those films, you know, people want those films, they want those shows. Shondaland, you know, is a great example of that, right? Wildly successful. So we need more of that. And that's what I mean. It's all related. You know, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And so if we want an America that is more understanding, that's more empathetic, that's more inclusive, that is, you know, able to sort of better understand the nuance and the complexity of who we are as a country, those images matter.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the important work you're doing. I know we have a couple of minutes left. I'm going to ask you one more question.
Sure.
And then I think we might have some questions on our thread, so we
good.
can pop over to those in a second. You know, you are doing extraordinary work, and it's so meaningful and important for our community and the world at large.
Thank you.
You must juggle a lot of things. You're a mom, you're here, you're traveling.
Yeah.
Our theme today at Facebook New York was all around health and well-being and finding balance. And I'd just love to hear how you find your balance and what you do to manage, just to get some space for mind, body, and soul.
I love talking about this because I think it's important, and I think we don't talk about it enough. So a couple things. I have been meditating for 20 years.
Amazing.
20 years of meditation definitely has helped. And I do hatha yoga. And but I do take care of myself. And I have boundaries around my time. And I'm home a lot at night. I don't have a lot of like crazy late nights out. I'm home with my kids, usually from 6:30, and I may log back on and work again in the evening. But like I feel grateful that I don't have a habit of like completely running myself into the ground. I do recognize my own limits and try to invest in balancing that. And I'll also say, look, I'm profoundly lucky because I have an amazing circle of care, including a phenomenal ex-husband who is every bit the equal partner and parent to my children as I am, actually in some ways more. So he actually has stopped working to stay home with our kids for a month because our daughter was having some challenges, which is amazing. Like, not everybody gets that. And an extended circle of care, et cetera. And of course, I'm lucky that we can afford to have childcare. I think many American women, like, this is just the great burden of our time, which is an absolute lack of support. And so I feel really lucky that I have that. I'm very conscious that part of my obligation then is also to help, is to try to fight for women that don't have the kinds of luxuries that I do. But caring for ourselves and figuring out where our limits are, you know, ultimately does make it possible for us to do more. And you know, I think we're all starting to appreciate that more than before. But it matters. You can go further, faster, longer by taking those moments to invest in yourself.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to turn it over to a question from Sue. What advice do you have for women who are inspired to transition into politics but don't have the experience?
Well, listen, if there is one lesson from 2016, let it be that experience is irrelevant to your participation in American politics. And we joke about this, but it's true. I think a lot of women, one of the biggest barriers in all the data that we look at, women constantly say that they feel that they're not qualified enough and that they're not informed enough to get involved. And it's sort of like, it's analysis paralysis. It's this like kind of, it's never enough. And I think we got to just kind of go for it a little bit more. There's all kinds of experience. I would like to see many more women who come from business backgrounds going into politics. Just for context, most of the women in Congress, and the majority of them are Democrats, although there are certainly some fabulous Republican women in Congress, most of them come from the law and from political backgrounds, like meaning they came up through state legislatures, et cetera. The vast majority of the men don't. The vast majority of the men in Congress actually come from business and from other industries, and most of them didn't have political experience before they ran. But women think we have to. So, you know, I think some of it is just confidence, like go for it. Your life experience, your experience in your community and in your work is every bit as valuable, sometimes I would argue more valuable, to understanding what this country needs. And so just go for it, please. And we're here to help you at All In Together, by the way, slight plug. We're here to help you. So come join us at All In Together and we'll help you figure out how to get it done.
Well, thank you so much. We're out of time, but I'm sure there are plenty of questions that we can follow up on.
Yeah, happy International Women's Day.
Thank you so much, and for all the important work you're doing for us, and it's just been a pleasure to meet you. And make sure you look for Laura's book on Amazon.com, Crossing the Thinnest Line. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here.